just sitting in the cushy chairs, right? Have a minute to relax. My name is Heidi Mercer. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning for Lake Orion Community Schools, so welcome. We are partnering this evening with the North Oakland Community Coalition, and Tanya Hamilton, who's over here to my left, is the Executive Director. So we are very excited that Lake Orion Schools and NOCC actually partners a couple events throughout the year. And so tonight we have partnered to bring you a guest speaker on the topic of anxiety. Before we get started, how many of you are here representing students from the elementary level or have students? Okay. How about middle? Okay. And high school? Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So this evening we have Lauren Yearego, owner of Yearego Professional Counseling in Lake Orion. She brings over 10 years of clinical counseling experience, specializing in childhood abuse and trauma. Lauren has dedicated her career to helping children, adolescents, and adults navigate their healing journeys. Her background includes serving as the clinical coordinator and mental health therapist at the Lapeer Child Advocacy Center, where she provided trauma-informed therapy in the immediate aftermath of the disclosure of child abuse. After serving at the CAC, she started her own practice to expand to working with adults, as well as a variety of other disorders and demographics. Beyond trauma, Lauren addresses issues like adoption and foster care, mood disorders, parenting challenges, and life transitions. Passionate about hearing the stories of others, she emphasizes the power of resilience and mutual growth within the therapy environment. Thank you so much, Lauren, for being here this evening.
Thank you. How are you guys doing? Good. Good. You guys made it back out after being home for a little bit. So today we'll be talking about helping kids through feelings of anxiety. Like Heidi said, I've been in private practice for about 5 years now. Prior to that, I was in the nonprofit world, working with trauma specifically, but it was through that I became a certified trauma practitioner and learned a lot about the brain, and found that within trauma, there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, a lot of other disorders kind of present themselves. And so I kind of learned a lot about that through my time at the nonprofit, moved into private practice, and kind of have continued using that with lots of different kids, teens, parents, that type of thing. I can use this thing. There we go. So that's me. So today we'll be talking about, basically I'll start by defining anxiety, stress, and worry. We'll go into kind of the physiology of stress and anxiety. So basically where that's happening in the brain, how it's affecting our brain, and what that means for us and as well as our kids. I'll go into signs and symptoms of anxiety. And this means anxiety as a feeling versus anxiety as a disorder. And then also ways that you guys can help, in ways that maybe we don't always help our kids. And then if we have time, I'll kind of go into some coping skills and walk you guys through, just different coping skills and ways we can help our kids through that. So first is we will define what is stress versus anxiety. So I think stress, worry, anxiety are all terms that are used pretty interchangeably as we're talking about it. It's I'm so stressed out, or I'm really anxious right now, or I'm worried about this. And so I think as we're talking, those words can be used interchangeably, but I really want to break down what those things mean and how they look in the brain. So first is understanding stress. So I'll kind of read this to start. So stress can be defined as a state of worry or mental tension caused by a difficult situation. And so I think the most important word to kind of note here is that it's a state of worry or mental tension, and that stress is a very generic system used to mobilize other systems in the brain and body to respond. So what that means is that stress isn't a feeling, it's not an emotion, it's something that our body does as a function very automatically, similar to how digestion works, or if our body's trying to heal, our immune system works in a very automatic way. Stress is similar, where it's not something we experience, it's something our body does. And so when it says that it's used to mobilize other systems, it means it's mobilizing things like adrenaline, things like cortisol, norepinephrine, which is like adrenaline, to basically get our heart beating faster, to get our lungs expanding to create more air. It really is just very generic, and it makes other systems go to create the stress response. And so this is where, when I'm talking to kids, I'll kind of ask them, are you feeling a thinking anxiety or like a body anxiety? And stress is typically the body anxiety, where they may or may not have thoughts with it. It's just their body is reacting. And the other part that's, I think, I learned this actually through researching for this, is that stress doesn't differentiate between psychological and physiological stressors. So psychological, something like I have a big test coming up, or I have a big meeting to prepare for. Physiological is more like if we are out on a hot day and we jump into like a cold body of water, right? Our body's going to go into stress trying to warm our body back up. Similar to how if we have a presentation to prepare for, our body's going to prepare us for that in a similar way with the adrenaline, with the whole body system. So this is where it's in the brain. So if we look here, there's obviously lots of parts of the brain. I kind of simplified it for you guys. But down here in the brainstem, which is kind of like back at the back of our head, is where stress exists and where stress functions. So this is where we regulate breathing, we regulate temperature, our heart rate, and this is a very, again, automatic function. This part of our brain is fully developed when we are first born. So you have to think infants, they aren't often like thinking about things. They're just like reacting, they're just kind of doing. And I know some people call this our life support system. So if all other functions are kind of like not working as well, our brainstem keeps functioning to keep our heart going, lungs functioning, that type of thing. Next, we'll kind of jump into worry. So worry is an attempt to problem solve an issue whose outcome is uncertain. And it's the worry system that plans, thinks, and uses words. So if stress is our body's response, like in our body reaction, worry is like our thinking reaction. So this is when we talk about like racing thoughts, or when we have like anxious thoughts. That's all kind of existing in the worry center. And this is where, when I'm talking to kids, I'll ask them, is it body anxiety, or is it thinking anxiety? And typically, thinking anxiety is the worry that we're talking about. And so where this exists is in the frontal lobe. So again, if brainstem is our stress response, frontal lobe is kind of like this part of our brain. It's also called the prefrontal cortex. This is where worry is happening. And this is the part that's responsible for all of our executive functions. So speaking, problem solving, reasoning, critical thinking. I'm sure many of us have experienced when we are under stress. Sometimes like our speech either speeds up or slows down. Sometimes we can't access certain words, like, oh, what was I trying to say? I can't think of it. Our problem solving, our critical thinking kind of go to the wayside a little bit, because these are all in the frontal lobe, and it's all impacted by stress, but is typically just the worry function. And this is the part, too, that it doesn't develop until we're 25 years old. So when you hear people say our brain doesn't develop until we're 25, it really is this frontal lobe piece. How I show kids in my office is if this is our spine, this is our brain stem, this is what's called like reptilian brain, or like our old brain that's fully developed. And then over time, our frontal lobe, or our prefrontal cortex, kind of wraps around and grows as we learn and gain more experiences, more knowledge, that type of thing. The last part of this is breaking down what anxiety is. So again, I'll kind of read the definition from American Psychological Association. So anxiety is an emotion characterized by apprehension and somatic symptoms of tension in which an individual anticipates impending danger, catastrophe, or misfortune. So it's really wordy. Basically what that's saying is, and the key word here is emotion, right? So if stress is a function, if worry is a system, anxiety is actually an emotion that creates the intersection of stress and worry, right? So that's why it says the apprehension, which is the worry piece, the somatic symptoms of tension is the stress piece, and basically if there's something that's unknown, if there is a potential negative outcome, anxiety will kind of kick in as a system of vigilance, I'll say, where it wants us to be prepared for whatever is to come. to make us ready for it. And so again, it's the intersection of our worry response and our stress response. And you can kind of see that in the actual brain, where again, okay, so we go through brainstem is stress response, the yellow frontal lobe is our worry response. Right in between the two of them is our limbic system. And this is where we feel, where we process emotions, memories, behaviors. And you can see how it's really sandwiched between our stress and our worry system. And so when those two things get going, anxiety will kick in, we'll have that feeling. And then the whole brain is kind of working to alleviate that stress in any sort of way. So I know it's kind of like a lot of like brain stuff. Do you guys have any questions about kind of the brain function? Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat what you said about stress is, I see I already forgot.
Yeah.
Stress is something, worry is something, anxiety is the intersection, or split that. Worry.
Yep.
Can you repeat that?
So like stress is it's like a body system, a body function. Worry is kind of like the thinking response. So stress is body response, worry is thinking response, anxiety is the intersection of the two. So there's times when we can experience stress without having worry, or times when we can have worry without experiencing stress. But when those two collide is when we kind of get that anxious feeling. Any other questions about that part? Yeah.
Worry and stress are emotions that cannot be avoided, but anxiety can be avoided. Right?
Anxiety is where we can work with the stress system, we can work with the worry system to alleviate anxiety. Whereas those two are a little more automatic. Anxiety is kind of where they collide. Did that answer the question? Okay. All right, so oops, I kind of skipped a piece here. So we'll kind of go into anxious feelings versus an anxiety disorder. This is something that I hear a lot from parents when they come into my office. It's like, is my kid just kind of going through a phase right now? Is this just kind of momentary? Is this more of a disorder? And trying to kind of break down and piece together like what is what's happening here. So to do that, I know this is, oops, it keeps skipping on me. I wrote down generalized anxiety disorder. There's a lot of words on here, but what this is from the DSM. For those who don't know, it's the diagnostic manual for therapists, for psychiatrists. It's what we use and look at when we are diagnosing someone with a disorder. So basically, these things are the criteria that need to be met in order to be diagnosed with a generalized anxiety disorder. So the first point, I'll kind of read through them kind of quickly, kind of stop at certain points. But the first one is excessive anxiety and worry or apprehensive expectation that occurs more days than not for at least 6 months about a number of events or activities such as work or school performance. And so basically what all this is saying is that it has to meet a certain threshold, right? It has to be excessive. It can't just be, again, momentary or just something that's meeting the stress or intensity, I'll say. It has to be beyond that. It has to be occurring more days than not for at least 6 months. So especially when we have kids in school, and especially high school, right? If a kid comes to my office and they are struggling because they have a really, really stressful semester, it's the first anxiety, the first stress that we've heard of. I'm not going to immediately diagnose them with generalized anxiety disorder because it has not met that 6-month criteria yet. That being said, sometimes kids come in where the anxiety is really flaring up and they've had existing anxiety prior to that, and it will meet criteria. But the 6-month piece is really significant and happening more days than not, as well as being in a bunch of different places as well. So this isn't like just at school or just at home or just with friends. We're seeing it in multiple areas where it's kind of spilling over. Second, the individual finds it difficult to control the worry. And then third, so this is the actual symptoms we look at. So they must be associated with 3 or more of the following 6 symptoms, with some of the symptoms being present for more days than not for the past 6 months. So the first bit, feeling restlessness or feeling keyed up or on edge. So this is, again, that stress, that body system that we were kind of talking about, where they just feel like they cannot settle down, right? Their heart is beating fast. They're having a full body reaction to whatever may be happening. That's creating a restlessness a lot of the time. Next, being easily fatigued, which I think sometimes can confuse people, where we think of anxiety and we think it's like we're going. What we don't oftentimes remember is that when we're going, there's going to be kind of a come down from that. Our body's working so hard that we're going to be tired, we're going to be fatigued. and it's going to show up in that sort of way. Next one is difficulty concentrating or mind going blank, which again can seem confusing because if we're having a lot of worries, a lot of thoughts, how does our mind go blank? But I think this is where, again, our stress system kicks in. So we might not be having worries all the time, but our mind goes blank because there's so much that we're focusing on that we can't like pinpoint the one thing. Irritability, so getting really snappy with like friends, with parents, with adults, even like peers, muscle tension, and then sleep disturbance. So difficulty falling or staying asleep, and then getting restless or unsatisfying sleep. And then these next three are present in most diagnoses in the DSM. It basically is like the criteria that needs to be met and is pretty common across the board. But this number 4, the anxiety, worry, or physical symptoms cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. So this is again going back to kind of that first one where it has to be excessive and has to be in multiple areas to be diagnosable anxiety. And then these last two are kind of similar. So it's not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance, so drug abuse or medication, another medical condition, or another mental disorder. And I want to highlight this one a little bit, especially because we're talking about like kids and teens here, and I know substance use is pretty common in teenagers. And when kids come to my office and there is substance use happening, I'm a lot of times looking at, is there anxiety that's causing and leading to substance use, or is the substance creating anxiety? And it could be one or both of those things, where sometimes if there was no previous anxiety, they kind of get into substances, whether it's vaping, marijuana, alcohol, and we start to see anxious symptoms arise or anxious symptoms increase. But other times, they're trying to self-medicate, right? And so I'd encourage you as parents to just like really get curious of, okay, what's happening here? Are they using and it's causing anxiety, or is there anxiety that's contributing to substance use? And to kind of break it down a little bit easier, we have anxious feelings here. We have generalized anxiety disorder. So anxious feelings, it's in response to a stressor. So I have a test coming up, I'm stressed. I have a test coming up, I'm anxious about it. I have a presentation, I'm worried about it. And it also matches the intensity of a stressor. So for kids, if they have a quiz the next day, we're looking for kind of like quiz level anxiety, not exam level anxiety in that moment. And then doesn't persist beyond the anticipated stressor. So test is over, exam's over, I'm feeling more relieved. Then also periodic and temporary, and no significant impact on other areas of functioning. And then within generalized anxiety disorder, kind of basically the opposite. It's persistent, excessive. We can't always identify a stressor, so we can just feel anxious for no reason. Our body reacts, our body is kind of getting to that place, and we don't know why. Unrealistic out of proportion. So again, that exam level stress for like a quiz. Recurring feeling of dread. Small responsibilities can feel overwhelming, and it also interferes with our everyday life, right? Where again, this is more days than not, we're feeling this, we don't always know why. Where it kind of intersects in the middle is that both of these things are, well, anxious feelings and generalized anxiety disorder. They're both very real and have very real body sensations, and they both increase our adrenaline and stress hormones. So even if we are experiencing anxious feelings, if it's not a disorder, our body is still actually really feeling it. There's something physiologically happening to us. Any questions about generalized anxiety disorder in comparison to anxious feelings? Okay. So next is going to be signs to notice and look out for. So this next part I kind of broke down into elementary, middle, high school, because I think it can look different for each kind of developmental stage. I will say, like the physical symptoms, like there are things that will overlap, but there are some things that are very nuanced for each developmental age as well. So first we'll start with elementary school. And actually, I'll kind of ask you guys first, like how do you guys notice or see stress in your kids? If anyone wants to contribute. Mm-hmm. Anger.
Lashing out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any others you guys have noticed?
Like breakdowns.
Mm-hmm.
Trouble. In school, leaving the house.
Mm-hmm. Like kind of being like avoidant. Yeah, and those are all like, you guys will see throughout this, they're all spot on. where the physical you'll see from elementary to middle to high school will basically remain the same. I think the difference is how it presents itself or how kids are talking about it, where kids in elementary school are typically they don't have the same vocabulary or the same understanding of what they're experiencing. And so they'll say, oh, I have a tummy ache, or I'm feeling sick, I think I have the flu, or I'm just getting a headache, my head hurts, I don't know why. And that can be really confusing as parents, where it's like, is this like a physical sickness? Is there something else that's happening here? And so I'd always encourage you guys, obviously, to like talk to your doctor and kind of rule out the physical things. But what I'll also say is with the stomach aches, headaches, especially in elementary school, is if they're happening very frequently, is to start to like chart it and notice if there's any like patterns or themes. So am I noticing my kids get stomach aches or headaches before school, or before a test, or before a sleepover or hang out with friends? Or does it seem to be a little more sporadic? If it's more sporadic, it's likely to be more so physical, where if you're noticing it consistently and in response to something, usually we're looking more at like an anxious feeling that's causing anxiety. And same with fatigue, restlessness, appetite increase or decrease. Really within physical, we're looking for any like significant changes that's abnormal for our kid. And we obviously know our kids best, and so if something just feels off, I would kind of press into that and get curious about it. Next one is emotional. So this is where we feel like the irritability and the anger, which I think for some people it can be confusing, because again, we think anxious, we think like where they're worried or they're kind of like, like cuddled up, or they just want like help, they want, hugs. Sometimes it doesn't look that way. It can also kind of present as this like snappiness, this irritability-ness, this anger. And I think parents sometimes don't recognize it as easily when it's anger, because we're like, what is going on? Like what's happening here? And sometimes, not always, it can be a symptom of anxiety. Same with low frustration tolerance. If we're working with our kids on doing homework and they just like can't handle it, they can't get through it, I think we can very easily get frustrated as parents. But sometimes that's a little cue or clue to like step back and like, okay, like what's happening right now? Why are they getting so frustrated about this? Crying, needing frequent reassurance, and then having excessive fear. So this is fears that go beyond what we typically expect for kids. So we look at like, they're scared of the dark. A lot of kids are scared of getting like kidnapped or something happening. Which are all, I think, normal for the developmental stage. If we see it kind of going beyond that, where kids like aren't leaving the house, or they like can't move through it, or it goes beyond just like a worried thought they have, sometimes that's a clue of like, hey, like, let's talk to a doctor, talk to a counselor, let's try to figure this out together. And then the last one is behavioral, where they become more clingy or more withdrawn, which I know are opposite, but kids I think can react differently, where they either want to get really, really close to mom and dad, or they withdraw and they want nothing to do with mom and dad, whether it's because of embarrassment, or they don't know how to explain it, or they're just confused. Withdrawn is something else that we see. School or social avoidance, difficulty focusing, and then trouble falling or staying asleep, I think are pretty self-explanatory. So next we'll kind of look at middle school. And I will say with middle school, this is probably the trickiest one. Physical is basically the same. Like we'll see where middle schoolers have a better ability to kind of describe what they're feeling, or say, oh, I have a stomachache because of this, or I think I'm sick, or I think I'm anxious. Emotional is probably going to be the most difficult part, because we're right in the midst of puberty, of hormones, of mood swings, all the stuff. And so I think this is where I see a lot of people in my office where it's like, is this my kid just going through puberty? Are they going to get through this? Or is this actual anxiety that they're experiencing? Because a lot of these things do look similar between kids that are anxious and the kids that aren't anxious. It's kind of just like knowing your kid and like, does this feel off or does it not? And again, that snippiness comes back up. Performance anxiety starts to kind of kick in here, where we get really worried about grades, really worried about like just either being perfect or having to like do really well. And the reason that contributes to anxiety is we obviously want our kids to do well, but if they feel like they have to do well in order to be okay, in order to alleviate the feelings of anxiety, we want to check it out. And crying, saying you don't understand, which again I think is a common one with middle schoolers. But when it's excessive, when you just don't get it, and they're trying so hard to explain it to you, and you're trying to understand, sometimes that can be an indicator, as well as mood swings. Behavioral, we'll start to see school refusal here, where it's like if they're feeling really anxious about school, it's like, I don't want to go, don't make me go, can I just like sleep in a little bit longer? So they just want to like stay home, stay in bed. And these can be common with depression as well. I know we're talking about anxiety, but some of these things do overlap. And then isolation, social withdrawal, these things are key because middle school is the developmental stage where kids start to move away from family of origin or parents being their like primary support group into like friends being their primary support group. So especially at this age, if we have a kid who's isolating or withdrawing from like friends or social things, we really want to like get curious about it and ask like, hey, like, what's kind of going on here? Is everything okay? And obviously we know our kids, there's different temperaments, different personalities, but as a general rule, this is typically when like they're thriving in their friendships and they're really trying to like press into their social supports. Same with difficulty focusing. This is where where substance use will start to kind of show up. Middle school, I typically hear the most about vaping in middle school, where again, we want to get curious and find out like, okay, is there anxiety? Is there some sort of underlying factor that's leading to the substance use, that's leading to the vaping? Or are these symptoms a result of the vaping? I can use this again. And then we have high school. Again, physical symptoms are basically the same. By high school, a lot of kids can differentiate between like feeling sick versus having that anxious feeling where it's like, I'm just feeling my stomach hurts right now. Like I feel anxious about this test, or I feel anxious about going to this party or going to hang out with these friends. Headaches as well, they can typically start to differentiate between anxious feelings or anxious experiences and feeling physically sick. Emotional, we start to see irritability and anger here. Self-criticism is a big one as well, where they start getting really hard on themselves. And this kind of ties in with perfectionism a little bit, where again, these two especially I think can fly under the radar because if we're a perfectionist, if we're kind of self-critical, the self-criticism is a lot of times more internal and the perfectionism is external, where that's what we see. And so we see our kids doing really well, getting straight A's, going to sports, thriving in sports, and we think that everything's great and fine and there's no problems with it, when in actuality, it's possible that there is an anxiety that's driving the perfectionism. And again, they feel like if they aren't perfect, if they don't meet this criteria they've set for themselves, then they have these anxious feelings and those feelings aren't tolerable. So again, these aren't like, what's the word? Hard set, I'll say. We always want to get curious about them and kind of see like, okay, is there more here, or is it just kind of presenting as it is? Back to emotional, we have the crying again. Catastrophizing, this is where we start to hear the always, the never, everyone, no one, everything, nothing. Right, those are the key words I usually look for when I'm talking to kids. And those are kind of like the key words of anxiety, I'll say, of like, no one likes me, no one wants to be my friend, you never listen to me, I always fail. Those types of things within the catastrophizing can be symptoms of anxiety or signs of anxiety, and then panic attacks as well. And then within behavioral, and these are kind of similar, the perfectionism we talked about, avoidant withdrawn from friends, but also family. I think I look more at kind of the friend circle and what they're doing, and if they've previously been really involved in the family and present, and now they're starting to withdraw or pull away. Again, we're looking for that change, and that can be an indicator. But then also procrastinating, which I think is one that drives parents nuts, is when kids are pushing things off to get them done. But this can sometimes be the freeze response, or within the stress response, it can be like our freeze system. So if we hear about like fight, flight, freeze, sometimes procrastination is a result of freeze, where there's so much happening that I can't do any of it. And then substance use and excessive sleeping or napping. Sleeping, napping is common in high schoolers, but if it's kind of going beyond what we would expect or beyond what is typical among their peers or friends, we always want to kind of check in on that. So, any questions about signs and symptoms? No, okay. So next, we'll kind of go into helpful versus unhelpful interventions. I can say I talk to a lot of kids, a lot of teens, and I hear a lot about parents, I'll say, and like, I wish they did this, I wish they didn't do that. So I'm kind of pulling from that, but also from what I know just through learning, research, those types of things that are helpful versus things that aren't very helpful. But first, and I think you guys are going to hear more about this from the Youth Action Board, but I kind of asked some of my kids, okay, what do they say? What do you wish your parents knew about anxiety that you feel like they don't know? So I'll go through these quickly because I think we're going to go more into it a little bit later. But I wish they wouldn't always try to make me feel better or make the feeling go away. I just want them to listen and try to understand. I'm not just doing it for attention. I can't always make it stop. Or them asking what's wrong a million times makes it worse. So straight from the kids' mouths, kind of what they wish you guys knew that they feel like a lot of parents don't understand or they wish they understood. So this next piece, I'm going to show you guys this quick video. It's typically used for actually couples and marriage conferences, but I think it applies really well to the kind of the parent-child dynamic. See if I can get to it as well.
It's just, there's all this pressure, and sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless, and I don't know if it's gonna stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me most, is that I don't know if it's ever gonna stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It's not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. All of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Come on, if you would just.
Don't.
So again, kind of a little kind of video show. Except it's usually used in marriage conferences, that type of thing. But I hear about it a lot with kids and parents, where it's I just want them to listen. I don't want them to try to fix it. And so you kind of take that as a little tidbit. But to kind of lead into that, so what not to do. The two phrases I probably hear the most of what not to do are the phrases "calm down" or "just breathe." And I think even with the best intentions in the world, if we're hey, just calm down or just take a breath, I think a lot of times those statements are felt as dismissive or as minimizing, where it's you don't get it, you don't understand, I can't just calm down, I can't just breathe. And so those statements typically aren't very helpful. And I usually, when I'm talking to parents, I'll compare this to if we're in a disagreement with either a spouse or a partner or a parent or a sibling or friend. If we're venting and we're really into it and someone tells us to calm down or just breathe, typically we get a little more activated, right? We usually increase, we want to be heard even more. We really try to show them no, this isn't, I can't calm down right now. And it's similar with kids. The second thing we don't want to do is project our own anxiety. And so what that means is basically when we're feeling anxious about certain things, whether it's things about school or it's things about friends, is making our anxiety our kids' anxiety. And a way to kind of illustrate this is I was talking to someone, I would say it was a couple of weeks ago, I was at an appointment, and they're talking about how their kid wasn't studying, and they kept getting all these different arguments, these different conflict about the kid not studying, and this kind of power struggle really. And this parent was extremely frustrated, I just don't know what to do. I want them to learn good study habits, I want them to do all these things. I think someone asked them, how are your kids doing in school? What are their grades? And she's oh, well, they get straight A's, but I just want them to learn these study habits. And so what we see here is the teenager, they had a system for what was working for them. They were learning the information, they were absorbing it, but the power struggle was coming from the parents' anxiety being projected onto the teen, right? And it was causing a rift in their relationship over something that wasn't necessarily necessary. It was just the parent kind of projecting it onto them and wanting the kid to feel, not wanting them to feel anxious, but wanting them to kind of feel the same motivation or pressure that, that the parent felt. So we want to be careful about, like, is this like my anxiety that I'm pushing onto my child, or something that they may be anxious about. We don't want to jump into fix-it mode, which we kind of illustrated with the video. So again, asking kids, like, do you want me to listen or do you want me to help? Is a really powerful question you can ask, because if your kid's coming at you venting, I think our immediate response is to jump into fix-it mode of like, okay, let's do this, let's do that, let me help you with your homework, let's create a plan for this, let's talk to your friends, when really they just want you to listen, they just want to vent and feel heard. Making false promises, I guess lecturing too, we don't want to lecture them, they usually shut down and don't listen. And I will also say with the lecture piece, when a kid is in full-blown anxiety, when their stress response is kicking in, they actually, all of us, we lose access to our frontal lobe, to that thinking center. And so if we're trying to lecture them in the midst of anxiety, they're less likely to learn, they're less likely to be retaining whatever information you're giving them, because they're in that stress system. And they need to come out of that before they're back in that thinking brain. Making false promises. So this is the statements of like, it's all going to be okay, or you're going to be fine, you're going to do great on the test, you're going to ace it, you know, your friends love you. These types of things sound encouraging and can be encouraging, but they also, when we're in the midst of anxiety, in the midst of a panic attack even, if we start saying these things, we almost become more hypervigilant. We become more like, no, like I'm going to fail. You don't get it. So we don't want to make false promises about the outcome if we don't know it. We don't want to ask leading questions. This one's more so like, hey, like, are you worried about this? Are you anxious about this? Is this what you're worried about? How about this thing right here? If we ask leading questions, again, kids tend to shut down and feel unheard. In the same sense, we don't want to over-accommodate either. So if our kid is refusing school or is scared of going to a certain like friend hangout because they're anxious, we don't want to reinforce that by saying like, hey, like, you don't have to go then. Let's just not take the test today. Let's just not go to the friend's house. We don't want to over-accommodate and reinforce that anxiety. I will say this is different than like a mental health day, because there are times when we just like need a break, right? So we don't want to over-accommodate, but we also want to listen to their needs and their what's going to kind of help them through whatever moment. And same with minimizing, dismissing. We don't want to say it's not a big deal, don't worry about it, you're going to be fine, because kids will typically shut down. So with that, we'll kind of jump into what to do. So we want to empathize. In these next few things, I always talk to parents about in kind of this order, where our first response is always to be empathetic and to empathize. Like, I hear it, like, what you're going through is like really, really tough right now. There is so much on your plate right now, right? Or I hear that your friends aren't listening to you, right? That must be really challenging, or you must feel really lonely or uncertain. And then we get curious, right? So asking kind of these open-ended questions of, hey, first of all, like, do you want me to listen? Do you want me to help, right? Or like, what's happening here? I've noticed that you've been like laying in bed more. You've been more withdrawn. Like, what's happening? What's going on? And with this, I'll kind of make the note of we want to ask kind of the what and how questions versus the why questions. Because we're saying, like, why aren't you going to school? Why are you staying in bed, right? Why are you not doing well on tests? Why are you not hanging out with your friends? I think for all of us, if we hear those why questions, our defense goes up, where we feel like we're being attacked or we're being accused of something. Where if we ask the, hey, what's happening or what's going on, or I've noticed this, can you help me understand this? It creates a little more open ground for the kids to talk to us instead of the why questions. And then we obviously want to listen, give them our full attention. So phones down, TV off, like really listen to our kids. And then reflect and paraphrase. Okay, so I hear you don't want to go to school because there's a really big test coming up, and you're nervous about that, right? And then going back to getting curious, like, is there anything I can do to help, right? But we want to make sure they're heard by reflecting back what they're saying. Even if it's an exact paraphrase of what they said, they're going to feel more heard than if we jump into fix-it mode or jump into response immediately. Another helpful thing is to help distract them, right? So with younger kids, this might be, with younger kids, I'll usually ask them like, hey, like, what's your favorite ice cream? Or do you know the answer to this math problem? And it sounds so ridiculous, and a lot of times they'll look at me like, what are you doing? But what it does is it activates their frontal lobe, and it gets them kind of back in their thinking brain and can help to bring down kind of the anxious response. At home, you can also, with younger kids, say, hey, can you come help me with this? I need some help with laundry. Can you help me fold these things really quick? With older kids, it's like, hey, I'm going to go for a walk. You want to go with me? Or even like, hey, I'm noticing that you're really stressed right now. Let's go get like a coffee. Let's go for a quick drive. Let's go like take just a break from all of this and help to actually distract them and pull them out of that environment. And it doesn't have to be anything big or extravagant, but just something to flip their brain out of the anxious mode into the thinking mode. Normalizing the feelings. We all feel anxiety. We all feel stress at times. So just kind of normalizing that as an emotion. And then modeling emotion regulation. So in my office, if I have a kid that's really getting dysregulated, or I notice their body getting activated is the word that I use, my first response is always to take a breath myself, right? So I'll go, right? And even if they're going, I'm just putting that into the room first, where I'm taking care of you, right? So it kind of goes into this, where I'm taking my own breath. Because there's something called mirror neurons, where when someone else is getting really worked up, we're naturally going to start getting worked up ourselves, right? So if kids are in a full-blown panic attack, full-blown, even just getting really angry with you, you're likely to start increasing. You'll feel your body start meeting them where they're at. And so the first step is always to kind of take that breath for yourself, take that moment for yourself, but then modeling it. And so again, with younger kids, this could be, man, I'm feeling really stressed right now. I'm going to take like 5 deep breaths. Right? And it might sound silly, like stating out loud what you're doing, but it gives them kind of insight into, okay, mom or dad's feeling stressed right now. They're feeling anxious. This is what they're going to do. Maybe I can use this too, right? Or with younger kids, it can be, hey, like, let's blow out 5 candles together. We hold up our 5 fingers and we, right? We go through each of the 5 fingers and we do it with them to help them regulate. Same with older kids, right? It's taking the breath first. And without saying just breathe, it's like doing it ourselves, right? We're saying, hey, I'm feeling really worked up right now. I'm going to step away. If you need me, like, come and get me type of thing. So you're modeling it for them instead of just like staying in it with them and continuing that cycle. Offering counseling. I use the word offer here because if we ever force our kids into counseling, it's typically not very beneficial because they don't want to be there. So I always try to make it an open conversation with kids and teens. And obviously, the older they get, the more I'd give them choice in it. The younger they are, obviously, they don't have as much kind of awareness or understanding of what that is. But if they are really, really resistant and a parent feels like they really need counseling, I'll encourage parents to say, like, hey, let's give it a try for a month. Let's go for a month, see how it goes. If you guys hate it, don't want to be there, we don't have to go anymore. But we can offer it. I would never like force them, even if you're noticing them being anxious or feeling anxious. We want it to be their decision, their choice. And like I said, taking care of you. So this is the classic, like put your own air mask on first or oxygen mask on first before your kids. And so a lot of times that's regulating ourselves before we help to regulate our kids. And then I'm going to go into, is this not working? Coping skills. And I'm going to kind of run through these. I know we're getting kind of short on time. Let's see if this is going to go. I have this video here. It's called The Science of Breathing. I'm not going to show it right now because we're short on time, but I think you guys will have access to the slides. I'd encourage you guys to watch it. It talks about like why breathing is beneficial and how it's not just a therapy thing that we talk about of like, oh, just breathe or just do this. There's actually science behind it and why it works in calming our body down. So types of breathing. I'll walk you guys through this one and we'll kind of speed through the other ones. Belly breathing is the first thing I teach to all my kids, right? It's called belly breathing. I also call it balloon breathing. Where if I were to have you guys right now take a deep breath in and a breath out, I want you guys to notice what happened with your body. And most of the time, what's very natural for us to do is when we breathe in, we suck our stomach in, we pull our shoulders up, and what's actually happening is we're getting really, really constricted. Then there's not a lot of room for airflow. And if our breathing is constricted, our body is constricted, our heart rate's going to increase, which is kind of have the opposite effect of what we want to be happening. So what I teach kids is to pretend that there's a balloon in your belly. And so when you breathe in, you want to keep your chest still and your shoulders still, and you just expand the balloon. So we take another breath, we breathe in, we expand our belly, and we exhale, and our belly shrinks. And so that's what I encourage kids to do when they're taking deep breaths. The next piece is the physiological sigh. This is a very automatic, natural response our body does, where if we are crying really heavily, if we're tired, trying to fall asleep, our body will automatically go, we'll take really short breaths in and a long breath out. And this is something that we can recreate to help slow our heart rate down. Because that's ultimately what our body is trying to do. When we're crying really heavily or we're really worked up, our body's trying to calm us down. So it's 2 inhales in that are short and then 1 long exhale out. And the exhale has to be longer than the inhale, because if it's not, it'll have the opposite effect and it'll increase our heart rate again. And then this square breathing, this is probably the most common breathing I hear about. It's like square breathing or box breathing. There's also triangle breathing, circle breathing. This is more breath work, where if we're actually practicing improving our breathing skills, we will count, what am I trying to say? It'll be a 4-count inhale, a 4-count hold, 4-count exhale, 4-count hold, and you do that 4 times. With triangle, it's the same thing, but you're breathing in for 3, breathing out for 3, holding for 3, and doing it 3 times. So if this is types of breathing will help our stress response that we talked about, so that brainstem. This next part, thought-changing techniques, will help our worry brain, right, our thinking. So sometimes I'll do with kids is playing out worst-case scenario, right? So we actually go through, like, what does the anxiety say will happen? And then we go, then what? And then what? And then what? And once we kind of get way far out, most people realize, like, this either isn't realistic or I know I can survive and tolerate this, so I don't have to be anxious about it. Next one is restructuring our thoughts. So noticing the cause of the thinking and then replacing those thoughts with something more positive, more helpful, more neutral. And then rehearsing mantras. So they're the kids, teens, they know these things to be true, and they can stand on those things and repeat them when they're feeling anxious to bring them back to the moment. And then last one, so this is kind of the anxious response, grounding skills. So if breathing is for stress, thought changing is for worry, grounding is for anxiety. The most common one I teach is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And basically it's a reminder of your 5 senses, right? So I can't ever remember them, but it's eyesight, breathing, or I can't even go over them right now, but our 5 senses, we go through each of them and we try to find ways we can, like, look for things we can see, look for things that we can touch, for things that we can hear. I'll ask kids, like, how far out can you hear, or how much can you hear right now? And then things we can smell. So kids, I'll have them use, like, either like lotion, hand sanitizer, just like something that can create a smell that can distract them from the moment. And then taste is the last one. And that will be things like either like ice cold water. Some kids will use like those little Listerine strips. That's like really minty and kind of like shocks the system a little bit. Are different ideas for that. The ice cube challenge with younger kids especially, see how long they can hold an ice cube for. And most kids are up for the challenge. They think they can hold it for a long time. But it also flips us from our activating sympathetic nervous system into our calm down parasympathetic nervous system. And so it kind of has like a purpose to it. And then obviously stretching and exercising too. And this doesn't have to be anything like strenuous or anything that's really increasing our heart rate, but just something to kind of get our body moving to move through those feelings of anxiety. And then you guys will have access to these things. I have some different resources for you that can be helpful. Up here with the books, the first 4 are for parents. The last 2 are for kids. That can be really helpful. Different websites for different meditations or thought-changing exercises. And then these different apps. So the Insight Timer and Calm are more meditation apps or have like different visualizations. Insight Timer is free. I think Calm you have to pay for, but Calm is probably my favorite one. And then Moshi is for kids specifically. In the Finch app, I think middle schoolers and high schoolers like this app a lot. It's basically kind of like a Tamagotchi where you have this like little bird that you have to take care of by taking care of yourself. And so when you like log that you journaled or you went for a walk, you get different like points to buy different, I think like outfits and different things for the bird, whatever you name it. So that is that. I think we have time for Q&As. Okay. Any questions you guys have about anything that I talked about? I know there was a lot there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you have to go back a few slides.
Yeah.
Some of this, it's like one more,
Mhm.
one more, one more. This one.
Yes.
This is so, it's like, my first response is the what not to do, everything on the what not to do.
Mhm.
And then, you know, this just seems so passive to me, just like, oh yeah, basically returning the problem to the kid and, you know, and like ask leading questions.
Mhm.
Isn't that the same as what one of the other slides says? Like, well, what would happen if you would fail? You know, because one of the examples you gave was about, you know, them failing a test. You're worried about a test, and you're just like, well, what's the worst that can happen? You failed the test, you know?
Mhm. Well, that's what I'm asking them. So they're coming to me with an anxiety saying, we're not failing this test. So, okay, like in your mind, what is worst case scenario?
Yeah.
Right, so I'm getting curious.
And that was one on the later slides, is, you
Mhm.
know, going down the worst case scenario.
Mhm. And so it's different than asking leading questions. I
Okay.
think what the difference is asking leading questions is kind of goes into that projecting our own anxiety, or we're making an assumption of what they might be anxious about, versus asking them, hey, what is the anxiety? And then asking them, okay, then what happens? And then what? And instead of me projecting it and saying, well, what if this, and what if this, and what if this? I'm asking them, okay, then what, then what, then what? And using their responses as the content, I'll say. Or the,
Rather than me saying, okay,
yeah,
that makes sense.
okay. Anyone else?
Can I ask that a little bit?
Yeah.
Basically, is what you're saying is in the first scenario, you're kind of like fishing and trying to figure out where the anxiety is.
Mhm.
And you're giving 10 different ideas, maybe 10 different things, ideas I think they could be anxious about.
Mhm.
But once the anxiety has been identified, then asking those questions about, okay, let's play out the worst case scenario here.
Yes.
You're not putting ideas in your head of other things they could be stuff that are already feeling anxiety.
Mhm. And I will say too that sometimes, again, if we are really curious if they're feeling a certain way, I use the word wonder a lot. So I wonder if it's this, or I wonder if it could be that. I'm not asking a million of those questions. So hey, like, I wonder if it's, you know, this upcoming test you have. And they're like, no, it's not. And it's like, okay, I was just wondering. Instead of asking, is it this, is it this, is it this? It's like, hey, like, I'm wondering this. And so we're kind of like taking ownership, taking responsibility for the thought and throwing out to them, but still listening to their response and taking their feedback and rolling with it. Any other questions? Yep.
So, kind of piggybacking off of that, my daughter kind of got very anxious,
Mhm.
and we've been trying to really help her figure out what's causing it. She can't verbalize that. And it's not, I mean, it's not that she can't physically verbalize it, but we will ask, like, get curious questions, and she'll be like, well, she's 10. When I was 4, you know, you didn't let me get ice cream from the ice cream. Like, it'll be something that's, like, clearly insignificant of like what is happening.
Right.
How would you kind of like redirect when they think that they've identified what's wrong?
I would go back to just the feeling, because again, anxious feelings, especially when we have an anxiety disorder, there's not always an immediate stressor, an immediate like cause. Sometimes our body just reacts with anxiety and we can't identify it. I think even as adults, we can kind of relate to that, where it's like, I'm just feeling anxious and I kind of want to know why I want to figure it out, but I don't know, I'm just feeling this way. And sometimes we'll get kids giving kind of those insignificant answers if they're either like being avoidant because they know they don't want to say, or because they just really don't know and they want to give an answer to try to like help their parents understand, even though they really don't know what's happening or why they're having that feeling. And so I'll go back to the feeling with them, right? So if it's like, oh, like what's causing or what's going on? It's like, oh, it's, you know, when I was 4 years old, you know, you didn't give me ice cream. So okay, what does that feel like? You know, what does the anxiety feel like in your body? Like where do you feel it in your stomach? Do you feel it in your chest? And then going into some of these modeling emotion regulation techniques, tactics. Okay, let's take some deep breaths with this. Instead of trying to figure out like what's causing it, just going into more like modeling and giving them tools and skills they need for it. So that kind of, okay. Yeah. Anyone else? Yep.
No, but
This is really more about like in the take care of you part of the parent. So if you have, well first to go back a few slides, I'm assuming that that hyper focus that maybe some kids can get when they do have the anxiety, is that gonna fall under distracted? Is it because they're like,
You taught me in the, one of these ones?
sure, yeah, and
Okay.
there's difficulty focusing?
Mm-hmm.
Is that because they're so all consumed with what is giving them anxiety?
Yep, so it's like the thoughts are going so fast.
So fast.
That it's like there's so many thoughts that we can't focus on one thing, or we go to focus on one thing and our mind's just like we're just fatigued, exhausted, and so we can't stay focused on that one thing.
And so they're really only able to think about this one thing and then they can't break away.
Mhm.
So as the parent, to back up to the other slides, yes, this one, when you listened so much and you've reflected and you've distracted and you've done all of those things and they're still so fixated. How do you not, that's what I think a lot of parents would be like, just calm down, right? Like, just stop. So where do we, is the only thing that's gonna help them with that with counseling?
That's where I would offer counseling. Like, hey, like, you know, I'm trying to help you out. You know, I'm not really sure if I'm like understanding completely. Like, would you want to talk to someone else about this that might understand it differently? Or that's not mom, that's not dad, that's not, you know, me. Would you want to talk to someone else about this? Is typically where, yeah, I would kind of offer that counseling piece. Because sometimes it's just we're hitting a brick wall if we're talking to our kids over and over and over again. And either it's they don't want to or they don't know, or we're exhausting ourselves. So that's where it's sometimes good to bring kind of that third party, even just for like parental kind of like relief or parent support. I know for a lot of therapists will work with kids, but also work with the parents also. Like, hey, let's try it this way, or let's have a together session, and really try to figure out like what's happening here. And then there's different tools and skills we can use to work on communication and figuring out, you know, what is the cause if there is one, or what do they need from parents that they maybe, you know, don't quite understand. And that could be a question you guys ask too, is like, hey, like, what do you need from me? Like, I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to do that. Like, what do you feel like you need? And then listening to them and going with that. So, does that answer?
Yeah.
Oh, yep. I need a question.
So my question is kind of similar to that, and this could be a whole other hour-long seminar. But what about when both child and parent have anxiety and they're both spiraling at the same time? What is a good halt strategy to give yourself both some like space? Like, what do you do in that scenario when you both need to reactivate that part of your brain, your thinking part?
Yep. So depending on the age of kids, I'll use the word alligator brain, which basically means that reptilian brain that's automatic functioning. And sometimes I even have parents call like, hey, like alligator brain, like let's take a break here. And basically what that means is it's like, hey, I'm in my automatic system, you're in your automatic system, like we need to kind of step away. That's where I do put a lot of, not responsibility, but I'll kind of encourage parents to kind of be that model of like, I'm feeling like really heightened right now, I'm feeling really intense, like I'm gonna step away, or I'm gonna take deep breaths, I'm going to do this. You're welcome to do this as well, but I just need like 5 minutes and we'll come back to this. So we don't wanna just like leave and not come back, we wanna kind of give like, hey, let's take 5 minutes, take a breather, we'll come back to this, but really kind of taking care of yourself and regulating yourself to get back in that thinking brain. Because if you're able to, then those mirror neurons kind of kick in, and the kid starts to see and feel your calm down, and we hope that they'll kind of give them a clue that they can also calm down or deactivate that system as well.
Yeah, because our child's 6, and so we're trying to model those good behaviors now.
Yeah. And it's hard, and that's where, like, the things I'll use with kids are like what am I trying to say? The birthday candles, so blowing out birthday candles is a big one. The other one is like a plate of cookies, where we're smelling cookies or brownies, where we smell the brownies, like smell them in, and they're too hot, so we blow on them, and we blow out. And so using like kind of those kid-like interventions, bubbles are a good one, pinwheels sometimes, finding a way to get them to breathe. That's not saying just breathe. Yep.
So I guess I'm kind of wondering where the end game is on all of this. If I know my child has general anxiety disorder, if we're going through these steps that seem to be how to deal with each flare-up or panic attack, do we just keep doing this over and over? I mean, at what point do we get past them? We just hope that they learn to do these things on their own eventually? I mean, if we're doing this every day and they're in counseling and they're on medication and how do we get to that cured state, I guess is.
And sometimes, sometimes our anxiety can alleviate over time. Some people will struggle with it throughout their life, and so it's learning how to regulate it, learning how to kind of calm our system down in each of those moments. And the analogy that I use is if we live with anxiety for a long period of time, I compare it to a sledding hill in our brain, right, where we've reinforced it in a certain way over and over and over again. So there's a stressor, I get anxious, my body responds with anxiety, and we do that over and over and over again. When we start inserting coping skills or grounding skills or some of these tools that we have, it's going to take a while to reinforce that path to the point where it's, I'll say, deeper or stronger than this other reinforcement, this other path. And so it is a lot of repetition and it feels very exhausting, but every time that you are repeating it, you are also reinforcing a more positive, healthy response. And so the hope is as their brain develops, as they get older and that frontal lobe is starting to develop, that they'll have quicker access to those skills and more of an ability to kind of calm themselves down when they start to feel that feeling versus responding to the heightened anxiety. Right, so I'm starting to feel anxious, my body's starting to tense up, I need to do X, Y, or Z before it gets to this point, but catching it more so at this point. So that's kind of and I know it's hard because we want there to be kind of this cure, this end game, but at some point, our kids kind of take that responsibility of learning it and doing it and using it to reinforce it in their brain. Yes.
So our daughter struggles with separation anxiety in particular, and I often struggle with, she'll have these episodes where she's afraid to leave us to go to school in the morning, but oftentimes the anxiety will start the night before, and she'll start panicking, and she just wants to be with us the whole night, and so she'll waste our time, she'll stay up all night, she'll try to get us to sleep with her, and I always struggle between being there for her at a time of need when she's struggling, and then reinforcing the negative behavior. So what's a good balance for that?
Yeah, how I typically differentiate between the kind of the over accommodating and the kind of the being present is looking at the level of dysregulation. So if there is anxiety, there's kind of anxious feelings, but we aren't in full-blown panic attack, I'll usually challenge kids and parents to try to work through that. So hey, I see that you're anxious right now. Mom and Dad, we're just in this other room right here. Let's do X, Y, let's do these coping skill things. Let's practice our breathing, let's practice this, let's drink some cold water. Let me talk to one of your stuffed animals and share your worries with them. And we're just in this other room. If they're in full-blown panic attack, we probably want to stay with them. We don't want to be just leaving them in the midst of panic because that can feel very unsafe. And so it's in that moment that I would kind of stay present with them and co-regulate with them. So it's really differentiating with the intensity, where we have kind of that working level where it's okay, I think we can kind of work through this and practice reinforcing this, and the panic level where it's okay, I need to help you co-regulate to kind of bring your body down.
Thanks. And as a quick follow-up question, is it helpful to try to get ahead of that, during the day when there's no outward symptoms of anxiety, to start talking through, how are you going to feel about school tomorrow?
What are you thinking? How are you feeling? It's called rehearsing, and so it's kind of rehearsing, rehearsing the day. And this we go into hey, what's worst case scenario? What's best case scenario? What do you think is likely? What's likely case scenario tomorrow? And that's a better activity or technique, I'll say, during the day when they're not in the midst of anxiety, but kind of helping them to rehearse the next morning, rehearse the day within comparing worst case versus best case versus what's most likely to happen.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We're good? Yeah. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you guys so much. Oh, you're totally good. No, I appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for coming out and listening. Hopefully some of this helped. I think you guys have access to the slides, so you guys can kind of go through all of that. And then, yeah, thank you guys so much.